Hi everyone, welcome to the second video in the Eazy ways to fill a sketchbook series. Now in this video you may hear some strange noises. That's because my daughter Tiffany, she is playing in the room. So now I have to work from home and she has to play from home. So I'm going to record my drawing process and do the voiceover later on because she can get quite noisy at times. Today we will be drawing something that starts with B, and I'm going to keep it simple. I'm just going to draw bees. So rather than drawing a collage of random items, I think it's better to just focus on a single subject and draw that. So I'm going to draw the flower first with pencil, and I'm going to draw the bee with pen and ink. By the way, that set of hands you see, yeah, just ignore that. That's my daughter Tiffany. Okay, so I'm going to outline the shape for the bee first. You can actually just draw with pen and ink straight away without the pencil line, because this is actually not a very difficult subject, relatively speaking. As I mentioned yesterday, I wanted to draw a subject that's really big so that it can be the center of attention. So in this case, this is the largest bee that I'm going to draw. For the other bees, they are going to be much smaller. I don't think bees are that easy to draw from real life, from observation, because they are so small and they are always moving. So using a photo of reference, this definitely helps. By the way, you notice the wings that I've just drawn. I drew the edge that's closer to me with much thicker lines, and for the part that is further away, I drew it with thinner lines because based on the reference photo that I have, the line that's closer to me it seems to be thicker. So with this particular fountain pen that I'm using, which is the Pelikan M200 with a fine nib, I can press down a bit harder to get that slightly thicker lines. This also makes the line art look a bit more interesting when you have lines of varying thickness. Other than varying the size of the bees, I also want to vary the position or the posture of the bees. So for some of the bees, they will be facing the side. For some of them, they'll be facing the front or at an angle. If you draw all of them facing just one direction, if you draw all the bees with the same posture, it's going to look very repetitive and boring. So later on I'll be painting this with watercolor. So notice for those lines I drew them much thinner. That's because they are on the surface of the bee. They don't actually contribute to the form of the bee, like the physical form of the bee, since they are on the surface. So I'm going to just draw a few more bees to fill up the page. In addition to the bees, I also want to draw some flowers, because if you only draw bees, again, it's going to look very repetitive. So I want to draw flowers to add more subjects. So for the flowers, I'm drawing some petals around the middle. I'm not sure what that middle part is called. Anyway, some of the petals are above other petals, so I'm actually drawing the petals that are above first, and then I'm going to draw the other petals beneath later on. I will also be drawing the petals that are above with thicker lines, just to separate them visually from the petals that are beneath. And also notice I am drawing behind the wings for the bee. That's because those wings are actually transparent. I can actually draw behind the wings. So when you have thin and thick lines like this, it makes the line art look more interesting. For this part here, I'm going to draw some bees that are above a honeycomb. And for the honeycomb, later on, I'm just going to be painting the honeycomb with a small brush to get the hexagonal shapes. The contrast that is created by the difference in size, it's looking good. And notice all the bees, they have different postures and angles, so they look interesting. And all those bees, they were drawn with pen and ink, as well as the flower on the right side. The biggest flowers there will be painted with watercolor without the hard edges of ink. So I'm going to start by painting with yellow first. This is Hansa yellow medium, and that pan of paint that you see, that is actually the Daniel Smith watercolor in stick form, but I have basically cut the stick into half. I broke the stick into half to squeeze into that pen, which is actually the Japanese Gansai Tambi pen. Unfortunately for that pen, it's not sold empty separately. It's actually a very nice pen because it's huge. You can put a lot of paint in it. So here I want to paint this big flower as one shape and later on charge in some color to make it a bit more interesting. So let me add some new gumbosh to the wet wash so that the color can blend. Now this paper that I'm using, this is 100% cotton paper, so it works, this particular paper, it works really well with watercolor. When I drop paint into the wet wash, the paint actually spreads out quite nicely. Let's paint some stripes for the bee. So once again, I'm using Hansa yellow medium. I'm painting the yellow first and later on I can paint the black over the yellow. For this flower, I also want to charge in some new gumbosh into the Hansa yellow medium. For the petals, they are going to be white. To make this flower stand out, I'm going to paint the background darker. So now we have color contrast to help the white flower stand out. And the background, it's mixed with French ultramarine and Hansa yellow medium. For this particular sketch, I'm using a limited color palette of Hansa yellow medium, French ultramarine, and a red. I'm not sure what red it is. Using the three primary colors, I was able to mix this neutralized wash to paint the transparent wings. So using the same three colors, I changed the proportion of the colors. This time around, I used a bit more blue just to make that gray appear to be a bit cooler. And I added a bit more red, and now it looks like it's violet. For this flower, I'm not sure what that is called. Anyway, that's mixed with Hansa yellow medium and red, so it's an orange that overlays onto the initial yellow wash. This part here, it's very important to use a brush with a sharp tip because you really want to get the hexagonal shapes looking like hexagons. If you have a brush that has a blunt tip, I have many of those brushes, those are not going to work. And this is actually quite small, so I need a lot of patience to paint this. And lastly, let's paint the black for the bees. So this is mixed with the three primary colors. For this particular black, I have a lot of ultramarine. I actually wanted to use cobalt blue as the primary blue, but cobalt blue, it's a bit difficult to mix like really dark black, so I use French ultramarine instead. Making art actually requires a lot of hesitation. So for today's sketch, I'm actually painting much slower compared to my usual speed. And lastly, let's add some highlights using white gouache. So I added a lot of water to the white gouache. I'm just going to add some highlights. This is going to dry lighter later on, so it's not going to be that opaque. So this is the completed sketch. This limited color palette of Hansa Yellow Medium, French Ultramarine, and a cool red. I'm not sure which red it actually is. Something that's like rose madder or permanent alizarin crimson. So this limited color palette, it's quite versatile at mixing all the colors that you see here. The flower is actually quite difficult to paint. You can see the definition, the form of the flower is not that obvious. The bees, they are relatively easy to draw and paint. And we have the small bees here. And this flower, I like this. The honeycomb has dried very nicely. It seems like a much better idea to focus on a single subject rather than drawing a collage of random items. Alright, so 2 out of 26 down. Do follow the series and follow along if you can. It's going to be very fun. We're going to have a wonderful sketchbook at the end of the 26 days. So thanks for watching. I hope this video is fun. See you guys in the next video. Bye.